Hi, I just released my second game, Undersea logs, and I want to share with you about the development process. It has been a long journey since I bought my first virtual reality headset, and I remember the experience of building this cardboard project in Unity just to struggle for hours to install it in my device. First, I was more focused on productivity and user interfaces, but I ended up following my desire of creating worlds that could approach these foreign perspectives that I could only inhabit in my dreams. There is enough reality in my day-to-day, so I just wanted to use my free time in a more artistic manner. My first game, Roadside Colonies, is a revision of far memories of orange houses and people walking inside the limits of a military zone. And being my first game, I orbited naturally towards the Space Invaders formula. In the end, I reached sailing in many respects. Performance, animations, variety, sound design, graphics, narrative, physics, etc. In every dimension where I expanded the game, I found myself insufficient. There are just three aspects where I consider I had a moderate success. One is technical proficiency, the other is atmosphere, and the last one is narrative. Three aspects that I sacrificed while introducing more of everything else, and that I just consider successful because I was able to build something functional. For this project, I decided to restrict magnitudes in all directions. First in space. Now all the time that I invested in my first game map, I would invest it in a single room. After that, I chose to develop my strengths, and only one learning axis instead of 10. I bet for more post and narrative experience with more simple but enjoyable interactions. Atmosphere and meaning will be my comfort zone, and physics will be the direction where I wanted to grow on. At the time, I was looking at the gameplay series of Voices of the Void and Look Outside games. These ideas captivated me and seemed to fit perfectly with the project restrictions. A process game based on panels and a routine would let me explore the physics interaction framework that I had contemplated, as well as working comfortably in a compact narrative inside a claustrophobic space. So I started mulling over ideas about isolation, loneliness, and existential horror. From hands holding golden ingots to the atmosphere of a submarine capsule and controls grouped in panels, the entire game was an act of improvisation. I don't have graphical artistical skills that would let me design and execute a particular vision. So what I did is to list all the constructions, blocks, and interactions that I could use from a list of assets, starting from an initial list of concepts. Claustrophobia gave place to a submarine capsule. Comfort, loneliness, and sustainability gave place to the kitchen and bed modules. Alienation gave place to an angular horizon behind a limitless sea. Humanity became whiskey bottles and the need to drink, sleep, and eat. And complexity materialized as panels, monitors, cartridges, and data patterns. There are two things that I want to talk about. One is the game loop, and the other is the narrative layer that gives meaning to every element that I placed inside Undersea logs, and how it fills all the experiential holes that the game loop cannot carry by itself. The entire game is about tuning in distant objects inside this anomalous space where the ship is stranded to process it, clean it, and print it into a cube. This initial idea took several months to materialize. In first place because I didn't prototype, I just went straight to implement this state machine full of interlocks and actuators that required the feedback drive, and the testing time multiplied several times beyond my estimations because I underestimated the complexity of this game loop. For every panel, I wanted to pursue a different experience. For the download panel, my intention was to show events triggered by the actuators outside the ship. I implemented a couple of monitors to show the antenna movement, also the radar pulse and the distant objects that you can tune in. And inside the ship, I added emissions to the husk, sounds that come from outside the ship, and also vibrations. The processing panel is essentially a progress bar, so I broke it down into multiple information sources. One being the general processing progress, the other is the quality of the data codified in color blocks, and the last one is the file size. so that it could work as a transition between the downloading and the visualization of the data, and you could take some time to explore other sections of the submarine capsule. And finally, the visualization panel. I had a lot of ideas for this during design, but I had to simplify it to the minimum. I reduced the impact of the data display so much that I had to resort to surreal images, strident sounds, and voice lines to avoid other systems to overshadow the climax of the game loop. Once having all of these systems implemented in the game, I playtested and realized the experience didn't stand by its own. It had a lot of pacing problems, so I compensated, or at least tried to compensate, with a dense narrative layer. So I spent the next week trying to give some meaning to the act of collecting data. And I ended up with an 11,000 words speculative science fiction writing. Confining my imagination to the game restrictions, I started looking for a short narrative structure that I could repeat multiple times with the small variations. And there it was, the multiple endings formula, right in front of me. 7 endings, exploring different perspectives about loneliness. The story of a man with no anchors, that receives some hope and throws himself into the abyss to recover what is lost, without guarantees. The biggest challenge of this creative process was to make sure I was writing something that I could implement in-game. So I created this matrix of channels and messengers, and I limited my writing to rely heavily on internal monologues and whatever payload I could send through these channels. And there I was with so many words, and the first version of the game just implements the first ending. Because from that exercise, I realized I needed several systems to represent certain concepts. For instance, for the forced isolation ending, I required to materialize the hope of the protagonist to go back home. And to achieve that, I created the recovery protocol panel. Another example is the day-night cycle. It is a way of highlighting the passage of time. And of course, there were more subsystems that I required in order to present the narrative, like a voice line queue. After finishing development of all of this, I spent the next months iterating between playtesting sessions, bugs fixing, and polishing the gameplay experience. I feel relatively proud of this rounded experience that, in contrast to Roadside Colonies, has an introduction and an ending, but my only remorse is that I wasn't able to cover the extension of the topics that I wanted to talk about. For my next game, I'm going to reduce the scope. My goal is going to be to convey a message instead of telling a story. With all of that said, if you stumble upon Undersea logs in this video or in SideQuest, I invite you to play it, leave a review or comment so I can read it and keep improving. Thank you very much.